Hello, thank you for watching this video. We're now going to look back at matters in another very important subject area that needs to be considered. And let me state that in my observations over the years, just in case you haven't noticed, until the election of 2008 or 2008, the country's political pendulum had made a wide swing from the middle to the right. Excuse me. Even today, there's still a concerted effort by a relatively few people who are making expenditures of vast sums of money in order to keep the United States and the world moving politically ever further to the right. What could have caused all this? Well, when did it begin to happen? Let's go into what some of the contributing factors may have been. Part of what has happened is a result of the conservative movement continually moving ever further to the right. The liberals want things to move to the left, and the increasing number of moderates are continually trying to stay in the middle. However, that middle, because of the efforts of conservatives who are often significantly more affluent and able to use their funds to invest into the electoral process, that middle is continually moving to the right also. In addition, the conservatives keep moving the limits of the right to extreme places that are even further to the right of the normal political spectrum. How could we, as a country, avoid moving toward the right under such circumstances as these? That's not the whole story, however. I believe that after hearing all of what is stated here, you will ultimately agree that a great deal of that change had to do with the four significant areas of difference that I've mentioned earlier, as well as other important factors that we will consider later. Excuse me. Here, however, we will consider the last of those four major areas of difference, and that is the question of race. Prior to the 60s, there was quite a large Democrat Party constituency in the country, and a large part of that constituency was in the southern states of our nation. During the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, however, things began to change, as we all saw the beginnings of a period when the President of the United States began to openly stand up for the rights of the African American minorities, including their rights to attend integrated schools, to have decent jobs, to have a decent home, and to be able to live and to vote without fear. All of these were rights that most white Americans took for granted, but it was not so at that time for minorities, especially in the South. I'm not saying that Presidents Kennedy and Johnson provided those rights, because many of us feel that quite a few of those rights are still in question today. But those holding the office of president finally began to stand up and say that the time had come for a positive change. These rights were supposedly available in theory to all Americans, but the reality of the matter was that they were not then available to most minorities, especially in the South. At that time, as a result of the actions of Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, the news media finally began to focus in earnest on the increasingly open manifestation by a great many whites of a deep level of hatred for the African American people that had long been present and was very deeply ingrained in the fabric of much of the South, but certainly not exclusively in the South. This hatred was, more often than not, a carryover from the days of slavery and the Civil War. Once that kind of hatred becomes part of a person's makeup, it can be very difficult to overcome. It tends to be passed down through families and societies from generation to generation. And for some people, far too many in fact, even to the present day. Some of these people could give you countless reasons why they feel certain that they're right to feel the way they do, why they should still want to and be allowed to fly the Confederate flag, the Confederate battle flag, why the African Americans should not have the same rights as themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them would even tell you that they believe that African Americans should still drop their heads and get off the sidewalk when a white person walks by. What a sad way of thinking, even though it is now done less openly, to have it still around today in our America. Now, as a way of helping you to understand that kind of hatred, let me relate to you a story or two about my personal experiences with some of those who have such feelings. There are two instances that I will relate quickly. The first involved the time when I was attending a nearby university, and I happened to overhear a number of white students talking about a problem that they felt had come about as a result of a young African American student entering a campus beauty contest. They didn't want her to be elected, and they had been concerned that the large African American student population would all vote for her and that she would be elected. One of the students laughed as he bragged about how the matter had been resolved. We just convinced another African American girl that she should enter the contest too. We were able to persuade her to enter, and as a result, the African American vote was split and neither of those two girls won. This is another instance of the effort to divide and conquer, or divide and rule. Sadly, things like this are still happening today. There was also a later time during the 60s when I was traveling through several of the southern states. It was during this trip that I saw for the first time in my life drinking fountains and restrooms with signs which identified them as being for use by colored or white. Even back at that time, these signs deeply troubled and saddened me. I knew then in my heart of hearts, even as a young man, that it just wasn't right for people to be treated in that way. At one particular point in the trip, I'd stopped for gasoline and to take a brief break from driving. Several men at the place where I had stopped were talking about their very strong feelings against African American people. One of them made it plain to all present that he had dynamite in a shed at home, and he would, without hesitation, use it to blow up the local school before he would allow minority children to attend there with his children. That was the level of blind, illogical hatred that existed then, that had existed for many years before that time, and in many cases still exists today in the hearts of far too many people, not only in the South but all over the United States. One of the biggest differences now as opposed to then is that the hatred tends to manifest in more subtle and less open and vocal ways, because the people with those feelings have learned that it's not wise, not politically correct, and might have repercussions if they allow their feelings to become apparent to all those around them. They simply voice their feelings now more quietly, under their breath, or with their closest friends of like mind, and therefore the impression is left with outsiders that things have truly changed and everything is okay now. In that regard now, however, you need only to realize that everything is definitely not okay now. This has been made very obvious since the election of the United States of America's first African American president. Although his election is proof that we as a people and as a country have come a long way since the decade of the 60s, there is also more than ample evidence since this election of the fact that racism and bigotry in the United States are far from being put behind us. What a sad thing to have to say about such a great nation as the United States of America. But unfortunately, it's still going on. Please understand that I'm not trying to say that there have been no real changes, or that all people in the South, in the southern states or elsewhere, are filled with racial hatred. I recognize that just over the course of my lifetime there have been a great many positive changes regarding the manner in which we deal with the questions and problems of race. And as just indicated, the election of President Barack Obama is proof of that. But there are still very serious problems. During the early part of that time period as I was growing up, our family moved to a larger city where I attended high school. I came into contact with people of many races, colors, backgrounds, and cultures. Later, when I entered the workforce, I had relocated to a still larger city where I once again came into daily contact with even larger numbers of people of different races, colors, and backgrounds. Over a period of time, I came to realize that all these people who had seemed to be so different when I was much younger were in reality not so very different at all. They have the same basic needs, and in their heart they feel the same love for children and family, and they want and need the same opportunities that are available to the rest of us. There were and are people of many races, colors, and cultures whom I cherish as friends. There were and are people of many different races, colors, and cultures that I don't particularly enjoy being around. But that has to do with their character and habits, not their race, color, or culture. My personal experiences regarding race and culture differences have been more involved with African Americans, but I know that the facts are no different in areas where Hispanic or Asian or Arab or Native American or other races and cultures are more prominent. Excuse me. These truths go across background, race, color, religion, and culture. Some of us may not like it or understand it, but as God's children, we are all truly brothers and sisters, and the sooner we begin to recognize, understand, acknowledge, and accept that, the better off we and our country and our world will certainly be. Continuing, we can see then that beginning in the 60s, in what seemed like a relatively short period of time, integration as well as equal treatment and equal opportunity for minorities, long overdue, had become rights that were beginning to be enforced finally by the federal government. Many in the Democrat Party constituency in the country, and especially in the South, began to reevaluate their loyalties to the Democrat Party. Sadly, far too many of them decided that if being a Democrat meant giving African Americans the same rights as whites, then they would begin to move politically to the right, knowing that there would already be large numbers of people there of like mind to make them feel welcome. Far too many of those in high leadership positions and on the extreme right, always ready to create division or to take advantage of a division that occurs within the population, welcomed them with open arms, as that part of the population began to vote more and more conservatively in increasing numbers. They will vehemently deny that they vote in such ways because of racial prejudice, and in many cases that is correct. They will talk about numerous reasons that they use to justify the way they vote, and that may be so for great numbers of them. But for far too many, those old feelings are still very much present, simmering, and in the hearts of some, boiling just below the surface. It doesn't mean that everybody is that way, but even one is too many, and there are far more than that. Now, many years have passed, and as already indicated, a number of problems of race have improved, thanks in large part to Dr. King and others. Some have improved significantly, as shown in the 2008 election, and in numerous other areas, but still not nearly as much as appearances might indicate. The undercurrent of racism that exists in this country is still one of America's greatest problems. The underlying hatred that fosters these feelings is so strong because there are still some people who insist on hating certain segments of the population. They may hate someone for any number of reasons, but those of different races and colors seem most often to become the object of such hatred. Those who have that kind of hatred seem to prefer hate rather than understanding and brotherhood. Perhaps they use their hatred to lower, in their estimation, the worth of the person who is the object of their hatred in order to try to raise themselves to some desired higher level, in their own minds at least. If so, then in some strange way that may work for them, but I can assure you that it's not admired in any way by most of those around them who observe their hatred, nor is it in harmony with God's plans for humanity. Those are my strong feelings about this. We must realize that the question of race and color is a key question in this country, By that I mean if we approach and deal with it properly, it can open the doors for greater harmony and brotherly love among all of our people, in fact among the people of the world. If we do not approach and deal with it properly, it can cause those doors to be locked to all of us for many years to come. Nothing affecting the majority of people in this country should be instituted without carefully considering the effect that it will have on the matter of race, and what effect the matter of race will have on it. The importance of this should never be underestimated. You can make a difference even if it's only in your own heart. And in truth, you should make the necessary effort to make a difference. And that is especially in your own heart. Excuse me. The benefit to you will be far greater than you might think. And may I add that these differences these days are even moving over to the area of religion and differences in religion. Let me say this. As the years of life unfold, like the petals of a rose, so too does a human heart open itself to thoughts of God. One result of this is that my feelings and my thinking have rightfully become more and more inclusive as the years have gone by in my life. There is no doubt in my mind that many other people's hearts and minds have also changed for the better. Obviously, I'm not saying that there is no more prejudice or hatred or even misunderstanding. That would be naive and certainly would be incorrect. There are large numbers of people who do not feel the same as I now feel because they have not been taught or have not learned or made the effort to learn otherwise. You may have noticed that I used the word taught, and I did so for a reason. These prejudices are learned. They do not occur naturally. They are learned from those around us as we are growing up. However, I and many others have discovered a very important fact, that those things which we have learned while growing up can be unlearned and replaced with correct information when and if they are later found to be in error, if we choose to do that. I'm saying that a great many people are working hard to change in order to rid themselves of such feelings, and they're doing so with varying degrees of success. Many of them have been able to overcome those negative feelings completely. I applaud those who have succeeded in that endeavor, as well as those who are still struggling and working hard to rise above old feelings of racism, bigotry, and hatred. Neither racism and bigotry nor their rhetoric or hatred have any substantive value or place in today's society, nor should they have ever had any substantive value or place in the society of any time or day. I thank you for watching. I encourage you to watch the next and subsequent videos in this series. Thank you.